Hello viewers and welcome back to the channel. Now today we are bleeding Shimano road disc brakes and also checking pad and rotor wear as well. Well, I say we, Scott is a pro bike mechanic, going to do the work for us and show us some tips and tricks along the way. Now Scott, I've had this bike in hibernation all winter, been in the garage on a rack, and I pulled it down the other day and the brake levers were spongy, so I guess it's a good time to service the bike before the spring.
Great time, yeah, especially if you've got any sort of events or holidays planned. Get it all ready now before the summer, because workshops generally get busier during the summer. And if you do notice anything that's not quite right, it's always best just to get it checked out.
So Scott, where do we start?
Primarily we're bleeding brakes, but where I've got a bike in the stand, I need the wheels and pads and everything out. I will be removing the chain first, just to stop it, getting any damage on your chain stays. So that's just as a professional sort of view, is to safety of your components. So it'll be chain off, and then wheels off, and then we can dive into the brakes.
I guess having a work stand helps. You don't need one at home, do you? But it just makes life a bit easier.
Yeah, massively. It's safe, it's secure, it's not going anywhere.
Do you have to take the wheels out to bleed the brakes?
Yes. Every single brake manufacturer's got different procedures in bleeding. And years ago, like Hope's would be like a car brake where you could go through the front of the lever, pull the lever, and then open the nipple. A lot of people back then would be leaving wheels in, but also you're at risk of getting brake fluid everywhere and all of your pads.
Plenty of dirt on that brake caliper. How easy is a Shimano bleed? Is it one of the easiest ones? Or?
It's fairly simple, yeah. As soon as you get everything set up and the bleed blocks in and the syringes, it can be quite quick, generally sort of 45 minutes and to an hour. It depends on how deep you're going in and if pistons need resetting, etc., all that sort of stuff.
So not too scary for the home mechanic to have
Not too scary, no. As long as these pad retaining pins aren't seized. On the older models, it's generally a flat bladed screwdriver, and they usually chew up and then get seized.
So these are original pads.
You can see a little bit of corrosion starting there. And I will set everything down in order. Pads will just pull out.
So now we can check the pad wear, pad life.
Pads are actually pretty good condition. And interestingly, Shimano brought out all new part codes for their pads. And they've basically added a chamfer to the bottom of the pad there. That's the only difference.
Is that to make wheel insertion a bit easier?
Yeah, essentially. So it stops less chance of catching on the way in.
Would you say there's much life in those pads?
Yeah, they're probably, I'd say, about sort of 50% through. Well, not even that really. There's plenty of life left in those yet. If you've been running those for about a year, you've got another year on those. Similar to like checking chain, as soon as you start checking stuff yourself, you know eventually how long something's going to last you.
Based on your usage and riding.
Yeah, exactly right. Right, so pin on the front, just pulls off, don't drop it.
I know I use the front brake a lot more than the rear brake, so
then we might see a difference in the in the pad wear. They're pretty good as well. There we go. Let's do a standard.
So what are you looking for? I mean, can you measure how much pad material should be there, or?
They don't actually, but you can generally tell when a pad is really, really worn. With the pad spring in place, if the pad is really worn, you'll be down level with that spring, and then you'll start getting grinding noises and catching, and pistons not retracting properly. I've seen them where pistons have gone through backing plates. It's pretty dramatic.
Cool.
The good thing with disc brakes on a road bike is you can put a torch down through the caliper, and you can visibly see pad wear on it. Whereas car, it's a bit more difficult with the wheels and everything in the way.
With the pads out, I guess, can we check do you check the pistons as well and the calipers?
We can check the pistons. You can visibly, this is where a torch comes in. Torch and white bits of paper, your best friends. You can visibly see if those pistons are coming out evenly as well, because you should see the same amount of piston on both sides. But we will give those a little clean up. before we bleed, and a clean up after as well. Now, just a quick blast of disc brake cleaner. I do that just to clean everything up so I can, it's easier to see everything.
Just getting rid of dirt and oil and grime.
Yep. And with the bike in the stand, this is where it's easy. I can just thread. This is a brand new clean cloth as well, so there can be no chance of any contamination whatsoever. I can run that through. You can just see a bit of dirt on the cloth first from the piston. And then if you look down through that caliper now, you'll see that those pistons are nice and clean compared to 5 minutes ago. And I'm putting the cloth underneath just so that I'm not dripping disc brake cleaner all over the floor. Because Cooper doesn't like the taste of it. There we go.
Shiny.
All nice and clean.
This is 12 speed
Yep.
Ultegra. Is the bleeding process the same for older 11 speed Shimano?
Yes, they've just got different sized bleed blocks that go in the calipers.
Okay.
Because obviously you've got that bit of extra clearance on the newer brakes.
Okay.
But yeah, it's pretty
All the
much the
syringes
same.
and stuff are all the
Syringes
same.
are the same. You will find on some older calipers you have a bleed nipple. This one, it's got the nipple, but to release that, there's a little Allen key just there. So essentially, syringe will go into place, Allen key in there, open her up quarter of a turn, and then it will allow fluid to pass through. Tools for the job, essentially, Allen keys, bleed spacers, syringe, funnel, and some genuine Shimano hydraulic mineral oil.
Are these all standard tools that you can buy?
Yeah, pretty
online?
much. Although that is a park syringe, you can use any syringe and hose essentially. The funnel is fairly specific, but they've just got different threaded
The Shimano one's yellow, I know that.
end caps. Yeah, this is a park one. Hope Do one, which is CNC machined. Which
And
should probably be next on my list.
mineral oil?
Mineral oil, Shimano. Lots and lots of people out there using different stuff and baby oil and stuff like that. But
What?
I know, right?
Really?
Go genuine, you can't go wrong.
Like try and save some money?
Even people using water as a last minute fix. It's full of air. It's not going to work. Just go genuine. You can't go wrong. And then if you do have any issues, warranty issues down the line, you send your brakes back. They can see it's genuine fluid in there. You won't have any problems. It doesn't cost that much. It's not the end of the world.
Last ages.
Yeah, you might save yourself a couple of quid by using some baby oil, but.
Don't recommend it. And I see you're wearing some gloves. I guess wearing gloves is a sensible idea.
Yeah, I mean, I always wear gloves anyway. I've now got the cleanest hands ever, and good gloves will last you a long time. But yeah, it also stops me getting rubbish everywhere. And you'll constantly see me still, even though I've got gloves on, I'm keeping the gloves clean. Everything needs to be clean, but the pads are out anyway, so we're not going to contaminate anything.
So avoiding contamination is top of the list.
Essentially, yeah. Because, I mean, as a mechanic, if I've got your pads in and I'm bleeding brakes and I get fluid on your pads and contaminate your pads, I'm looking at having to replace your pads, my cost, and possibly rotors too. So yeah, take them out. It takes seconds to do, and it stops any chance of contamination.
Right.
So now we are bleed blocks into place.
These are to keep the pistons in place and stop them.
Yep, they will literally pop in, front and back. If I had two funnels, I'd be doing both at the same time, but I haven't. But I'd like to put them both in there, just in case anyone comes along and pulls a brake while I'm doing it. Then there's no
Nobody would do
chance
that,
of me
will
able
they?
to reset everything. No, they wouldn't. No.
Not me.
What you can do is the brake pad pins. You can pop those back in.
Belt and braces.
A couple of turns, just stops them falling out.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, I tend to go, the pick I was using earlier to take the rubber covers off, I tend to just slide that straight through. It's quite easy. But yeah, that makes them nice and secure. They're not going to go anywhere. And then we can move to the levers to get those ready for the funnel. Which on Di2, because they've got the buttons on the top, the reservoir covers are generally just under the hoods there. I'm hoping that you haven't taped over them. There you go, just there. Generally, if you're doing this at home, do sort of one at a time. I will, because I've got it in the stand, and after efficiency, I'll do 2 at a time.
Now we're bleeding both brakes. Generally, it makes sense to bleed both brakes.
Yes, I don't usually do one, because if you have got an issue with one, you know, very close to down the line, you're going to have issues with your other brake. And also, being in the workshop, I want your brakes to feel exactly the same. So I will know by doing both and setting both up exactly the same, they're going to end up being exactly the same. But yeah, I always do 2 at a time. It doesn't take that much longer, and you know the job's done properly.
I guess once you've got everything out and you're getting messy with fluid everywhere, you might as well do both.
Yeah, see, that one's a little tight. And a lot more fluid in that one already than in your front one.
Yeah, the front lever was definitely pulling a long way to the bar when I pulled it off the rack. I did the overnight tape trick, which worked quite well.
Yeah, I mean, visibly from that, you can see that there's more fluid in your rear than there is in the front. And doing it with the bleed blocks and doing both at the same time, it's now going to guarantee that they are going to have the correct amount of fluid in them. Now we want funnel on. If we start with the rear, so put on. Be really careful with this, don't force it, because it is plastic threads in the lever. Just nips up. We are going to get a bit of fluid on there, so it's good practice to clean up as you go along so you don't get it everywhere.
Watch that bar tape.
Yes. Plunger will be in there. And we'll go for syringe fluid. Generally these systems will be holding sort of 20 to 30 mil.
So you fill it all the way up.
Yeah, not quite. I'll leave a little bit of space.
Avoid air bubbles, I guess.
Yeah.
Just a primer or anything like that?
No, she's all good as she is. If there is a small amount of air at the bottom of that syringe, it's going to come up through the funnel, because that amount of fluid in there is more than what's going to be in your hose. Obviously, we've took the covers off. That goes onto the bleed port. Open up the nipple, quarter of a turn. I do hold it on there just because, you know, if there is any pressure or anything in there and it tries to blow off, you just get fluid everywhere. And I'll gently push that syringe through and you'll see it coming out at the lever.
Are you pushing quite firmly or?
Yeah, a little. And then she comes up at the lever. In condition, I just saw a little bit of air coming up then. Condition of that fluid is actually quite good compared to what I've seen.
So this could be dirtier if it was.
Yeah, if your pads were wearing unevenly and, you know, pistons advanced, if, you know, any excess heating up in that rear brake, is essentially wear the fluid out. There you go. I'm at the end of that syringe. I will just lock up that.
So most of that syringe has gone in there.
Yep, pretty much all of it. I will take that off, careful not to flick it up. Cloth, clean off any residue, and after again we go through and clean it like we did earlier as well. So there's 0 chance of contamination. Give the lever a few pulls. If there's air near the top of that lever, it's going to come up through the funnel. Almost what's known as sort of a lever burp. So if you do get slightly spongy brakes, you can almost prime a funnel up like this and just keep pulling. If there's air in there, it will just come up through the system.
So pulling the lever, trying to
essentially allows air to come back up through the funnel, because air's gradually going to go upwards. What you find is on mountain bikes where they've got a big loop in the hose, it can be good practice to drop the caliper down so that the air's travelling up the hose, so it's not sitting in one place. But there was very, very, few bubbles coming through that. I would say that is good.
So you're putting the lever just enough times until you're happy, no more bubbles are coming out of the...
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's more, I kind of do it out of practice rather than anything.
You're now putting the stopper...
Plunger back in to stop any fluid coming out. There will be a bit of fluid that's in the bottom of there which may come out.
Are you removing it now?
Yes. And that will be the perfect oil level. And that is rear one done. Theory on bleeding is basically the same for everything, but there are a couple of ways. We've sort of back bled through there. You can essentially put the funnel on the top, fluid in, compress the lever, open up the bleed nipple and allow fluid out that way, as you would a car bleed. Old school hope bleeding was exactly the same. But yeah, you can go either way, essentially. And SRAM, obviously, it's syringe and syringe, but the theory is exactly the same. With SRAM, they want you to pull up to bleed the lever, pull up to bleed caliper, and then flush through. But it's all dependent on how much air is coming out.
Okay.
And confidence in knowing that that breaks fine, which we'll see in a bit.
But the theory is the same in terms of pushing fluid through
Yeah.
from one end,
Yeah.
removing all the air,
Yep.
and then done.
Yeah. You can go in through the top. I just find it takes longer. Results are exactly the same.
Okay. Results are the important thing.
Yeah.
Same process for
Exactly the same process
front.
on the front. Now I know from what you told me that you were having occasional issue with your front brake.
Yes.
So when I put that syringe fluid through, we hopefully should see a lot of air bubbles fairly quickly.
So the front and rear, identical process.
Identical process, you will find usually,
Is that an air bubble coming out already?
yeah, that's in my syringe. But it's so close down to the end, I'm just going to push it through. And we'll see that at the top. There you go.
Lots of air bubbles.
Again, fluid condition's pretty good, there's some more air. Again, a few pulls on that, and she's feeling, and then I can compare. Front and rear are feeling the same.
The same lever travel.
Obviously, currently, yeah, they're not going to move far because the bleed blocks are in there, but when they're out and we've got pads back in, and then I set up the pistons, then we'll get a feel for how they really are. Port covers back on. Yeah, if it's not going in nicely, start again.
What, don't force it in.
Don't force it in, and it only needs nipping up. And of course, with the fluid there,
It's all slippery.
it's almost pressurised as well,
Yeah.
so that just needs nipping.
So,
Port plugs back in, we'll put your hoods back, and here's a tip, get these back as quickly as you can because they start to sweat up just there when they're folded back. And they generally are quite difficult to clean back to how they were.
so now we put the pads straight back in, or is there another step?
Pads, I
first?
will give them a very small clean up. Obviously, we know that you've not got sort of any issues with noises or anything.
No.
So I will literally just sort of clean around the pad.
So these pads, we're happy, you're happy,
I'm happy that they
can be used.
wearing them is absolutely fine. Although she's just starting to catch the top of the rotor there. You've got a year's worth of use in. All I'll do is I'll just clean up round the side with my little clean pick. That's actually just coming off the top there, so give them a little blow off. You don't have to clean up the pad spring. This is just me going the extra mile.
Clean bike is a happy bike.
Indeed, and it's obviously then easier to see it when you go and set them up. Pad springs in place. Even though I've got clean hands, I am not wanting to touch that pad surface.
So you really are being careful with the pads then, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't want to touch it at all because I mean, I've got gloves on, but if you've not got gloves on, you've got natural oils in your hands that can cause contamination as
Even,
well.
really?
Directions, right and left. Squeeze slightly, just for ease of insertion. They will push all the way in. Now, before I go and try and struggle putting the pad retaining pin in, this is where my little pick comes in, because the pin won't go all the way in. They need lifting ever so slightly to make it easy for the retaining pin to go in.
Pro tip.
Pro tip. That is completely and utterly dry. I will put the very, very, very smallest amount of grease on that thread. And when I say minute amount, I mean a minute amount to the point where you probably can't see it,
No.
but it's there. And that's for if you're then coming back to me and I need to do your brakes again in a year's time. I know that that pin is going to come out and just nip. The little safety pin sits on the back.
If you're not lost
So
in the fridge.
On the gravel. So if the retaining bolt did come loose and start coming undone, it's not going to go anywhere because that little pin's on there.
Right, Scott, pads are back in. What's
Pads back
next?
in. We are now at a little techie bit, or a bit that I like to concentrate more on, rather than just putting wheels in, slackening bolts, pulling brake and going, there you go, set up. I'm going to slacken off the calipers in a second after I've checked that the pistons are actually advancing evenly with an old rotor or the pad spreader, essentially. I will just clean this off first.
Just to ensure no contamination.
Just to make sure, yeah. And rather than cloth, I'm using some kitchen roll.
If you don't have a spare rotor, can you improvise?
Tricky one that, really, yeah, because you want to be using something substantial or big enough that you're not causing pressure on the pad. So if you put a screwdriver in there, you're going to damage sort of pads. You do want something the same sort of thickness as essentially what rotors you've got on there, or the pad spreader.
And it's a special tool.
Yeah, I mean that is only about sort of 15 quid.
Okay.
Rotor, same sort of 15, 20. You only need a cheap one, really.
Okay.
I'm putting rotor up, and I'm going to pull the brake, and if one of the pistons moves more than the other, I'm going to push it back so that the pistons are both moving evenly. I can see your left one's going slightly more.
So you're trying to make sure they're pulling out evenly.
Pistons are pulling out evenly, because if we don't and we set it up, then further down the line you could end up with a seized piston and wearing pads.
And how are you using the rotor to do this?
I'm literally pulling back on that pad,
applying pressure,
and then pulling the lever, which is essentially waking up the opposite piston so that they come out evenly.
so you're putting pressure on one to stop it coming out and
Yeah.
forcing the other one to come out.
Yeah.
I guess experience comes into play quite a bit here.
Yeah, on sort of how much you're doing it. And then I will look down. It's going to be difficult for your camera. I've now got obviously hold of the brake, and the rotors needs to be central in the caliper. And now I know that those pistons have come out evenly. It's an extra 2 minutes. It's just doing it
Another pro tip.
properly. Yeah.
Working
Yeah,
nicely.
pistons are now freely moving evenly. So I know now we can put the wheels in and then center the calipers. So now we're going to put the wheels back in, but before we do that, I'm going to measure the thickness of the disc rotor to make sure that it's not worn. Shimano generally 1.8 mil, and minimum requirement on that is 1.5. So if you get down to 1.5 mil, it's time to replace the rotor. Additionally, if there's any sort of scoring from stones or anything like that as well, would be time to replace. Digital
There's
verniers.
no grooves or on there like tyres.
No, unfortunately not. That would be a cool idea, but it'd probably cost them a fortune to do.
Shimano, one for future group set.
Unfortunately, this thickness. Oh, there we go. Around sort of 1.7.
You need a new battery in your
Yeah, no.
tool.
Oh, that's showing.
1.73?
Around 1.7.
1.69.
So you've used essentially almost sort of 30% of your rotor, and probably about the same on your pads.
So plenty of life.
So you've almost essentially, you've got at least a year on your rotors and pads, maybe 2 if you're careful, depending on your type of riding. It's full on snoring.
Sorry for the interruption, but it's a very cute puppy. It's snoring very loud in the background. How old is Cooper now?
He's coming up to 2 months.
2 months old.
Yeah. 13 kilos the other day.
13 kilos and snores very loudly. Anyway, back to disc brakes. And we don't need to clean them. We're happy. They're not making any noise.
No, you've got no noises. Obviously, original pads. That rotor has got original pad material on. If we start cleaning everything, you've got to redo bedding in processes, etc. So it's absolutely good as is. If you do have issues, then we go full on, brake cleaner or isopropyl alcohol just to clean everything down.
So while they're working nicely, they're not making any noise, don't
touch.
them.
Yeah.
Literally turn your fingers
Don't
and
touch.
cleaning.
Yeah.
Okay. And no chain, of course.
No chain on because we took it off at start. No pulling the brake either because I've just set those pistons up. So wheel in. Interesting, there's torque measurements on those.
On the throw axle,
On through axles
which is,
is a grey area.
what did it not say?
It doesn't say on it actually, I don't think.
Well,
But
normally-
what I will say, no, it doesn't say, is if you're out and about and you get a puncture and you need to undo that, and I do it up to 20 newton meters with a torque wrench, what are you going to undo it with?
I've had test bikes when the throw axle has been so tight,
Exactly.
I couldn't get it out.
So I tend to go multi-tool because you're going to have a multi-tool. You know, so long as it's not flapping in the wind, as a new one, you know, or not too tight. It's got to be good for you, essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's nipped up, and now I will release the caliper bolts.
Okay. This is to
So that I
centre the caliper.
So I'm now centering the caliper, yeah.
So 4mm Allen key.
4mm Allen key on the new Shimanos. I'm not using a ball ended, use a flat end. And because we have now already centred the pistons, we are now good to pull the lever, nip the bolts up, and then check it's okay. Which means me stretching, I can pull that lever,
Put the brake lever.
and at the same time, into a yoga position, and these are getting the nip treatment. If you go too tight on one and then the other, it will twist the caliper. At which point I will get my torch, or if you've not got a torch, if you do use a torch, use some up with a very low lumen, because otherwise you blind yourself, or a white piece of paper. Point it away from the camera to start with and see how we go. And now, if you were to look directly down, she should be perfectly set up.
Nice.
Without the chain on, obviously if the chain's on and you pedal forward, you've got quite a free up, you generally will have a loud free up. Without a chain on, spin wheel backwards. If there's any rubbing, you know it's not set up right. And at the same time you can check down and see if the rotor needs truing at all, which that doesn't. That is absolutely bang on.
I can't hear any rubbing.
That's my finger. Obviously, yeah, keep fingers away from rotors and spokes as well.
So that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's partly thanks to that piston
yes.
realignment you did.
Piston setting up to begin with makes it easier to set it up in the long run. So I've
Setting
nipped those up to begin with to make sure it's all set up right, and yeah, we are 6 to 8 newton meters. I'm just going to go for 6 to be honest, because obviously 8 is a max, and it's a max, not a target. And you see from my nipping up, I was probably at 4. There you go.
That is
Beautiful,
done.
beautiful. Rear brake setup, so now to the front. Exactly the same process as the rear. What I will add on as well, obviously, if I was to go and then put extra torque on your axle, there's a good chance it could put your brake setup out. Now the caliper's free, I can pull the brake, because we know that's going to be central. Nip up, nip up. That lower bolt has got a little safety tab on, which is that noise. And see that that is absolutely perfect as well. You might see that from the front, Dave.
Nice.
So now we can torque up those bolts. And that is all from doing that 2 minutes extra, setting up those pistons so that they're both moving evenly.
Pro tip, Scott. What is it?
Pro tip. Yeah, basically, well, gloves are off now, nice and clean. What you can do is if your brakes, if you don't know if they're feeling right or not, or you know, you're unsure, you can literally measure to the end, see 65, sort of bang on, and then measure across, same point on this side. And if they are at the same reach, they're going to be set up exactly the same.
If they weren't at the same,
If they weren't at the same reach, there are reach adjustment on these brakes, and obviously adjust that they are both the same, and then we can then dig into, obviously this is very dependent on hand strength, is feel the bite point and measure the gap then from the bite point as well. It should be exactly the same on both sides. And then you know both brakes are set up exactly the same, bang on.
so brakes done, put a chain back on.
Brakes done,
Good to go.
chain back on.
Right, so brakes are bled. We checked the pads and the rotors are all fine. Good to go. Pretty easy process, really.
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. Admittedly, it is only a year old. It's a new brake system. It's pretty much always going to go to plan, especially when you've had no issues. But anything older or with a bit of contamination, there'd have been a lot more work to do.
Fantastic. And big shout out to Scott for sharing his expertise and some pro tips on bleeding brakes and making it look very easy as well, but hopefully not too scary for those of us at home keen to try it ourselves, or if you want to use a mechanic like Scott, I'll put a link to his website down below and his socials as well. Definitely worth checking out. I highly recommend his services. Yeah, thanks for your time, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And see you all again very soon.